Okay, so we're diving into some really cool stuff today. You know how some ideas just stick with you? Like they're super memorable and effective, whether it's like a presentation or teaching something or even just figuring out this crazy world. We all want to know what makes those ideas tick, right? You've actually pulled together some amazing notes, mostly from Ch and Dan Heath's Made to Stick.
Yeah, it's a classic.
I think we're going to unearth some seriously valuable insights here.
For sure. It's definitely a fascinating challenge, and it's something we all face, right? Like how do we make our ideas really resonate? And the Heath brothers, they start with this really intriguing concept. They call it the curse of knowledge.
Wait, the curse of knowledge, yeah. It's like the more you know, the harder it is to explain it to someone else.
Exactly.
Something I've definitely run into, like I get so deep into a topic that I forget how confusing it can be for someone just starting out.
Yeah, it's like trying to teach calculus to someone who's never even seen an equation before. So to tackle that curse, they offer this framework. They call it their SUCCES principles to make any idea stickier.
CES. Okay. I like it already. It's catchy. But does it actually work in the real world? I mean, is it about manipulating people or genuinely connecting with them?
That's a great question, yeah. And it's a really important one. It's definitely not about tricks or manipulation. It's about really understanding how our brains work, you know, like why some things stick and others don't.
Right, right.
So let's start with symbol. It's kind of the foundation of the whole thing. Think about Southwest Airlines, the low-fare airline. Crystal clear.
Absolutely. Super straightforward. But isn't there a danger in oversimplifying things? Don't you lose some of the nuance?
Oh, for sure. That's the balancing act, right? It's not about dumbing things down. It's about finding that core message, the essence of what you want to communicate.
Yeah.
Like the inverted pyramid in journalism. You hit them with the key info first, and then layer in the supporting details.
So grab their attention with the what first, and then explain the why later. That makes sense. Especially in today's world, where everyone's attention span is like super short. But what about making things memorable, like really grabbing someone's attention?
Well, that's where unexpected comes in. There's this great story in the book about a Sony engineer back in the 1950s, Masaru Ibuka. He challenged his team to create a pocketable radio. Back then, radios were like these huge pieces of furniture.
Oh, yeah, I remember those. My grandma had one. Practically an antique. But a pocketable radio. That sounds almost ridiculous for the time.
Exactly. It seemed like impossible even. But you know what? Embracing that unexpected challenge, it led to the invention of the transistor radio. Wow. Which completely revolutionized how we listen to music.
So it's about shaking things up, breaking those preconceived notions.
Yeah, disrupt those expectations.
But how do you make sure people believe what you're saying? Just because something's unexpected doesn't automatically make it credible, right?
You're absolutely right. And that's where the principle of concrete comes into play. We remember tangible things, images, stories, details we can grasp. It's the difference between saying oral rehydration therapy is effective and actually showing someone a packet of salt and sugar.
Right.
The ingredients for this life-saving solution.
Like that story about James Grant from UNICEF carrying those packets around to make a point. It's so simple, yet so powerful. It's not just an abstract concept anymore. It's something you can hold in your hand.
Exactly. He understood that abstract concepts, they need grounding in the real world. Now think about credibility. How do you get someone to buy into your idea, especially if it's something new or challenging?
Well, you could cite experts or research, but everyone does that.
That's true, and that's why vivid details and even anti-authorities can be so effective. The book talks about Barry Marshall, the researcher who drank a beaker of bacteria to prove that ulcers were caused by bacteria, not stress, as was the common belief at the time.
Okay, that's commitment. You can't argue with that kind of evidence, even if it is a little extreme. Definitely not something I'd do.
Yeah, it was a bold move for sure. And while we don't always need such dramatic proof, it highlights that credibility often comes from making your claim testable, allowing your audience to participate in the validation process.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. So it's not just about telling people something, it's about showing them and letting them come to their own conclusions. That makes a lot of sense. It's way more engaging than just being lectured at.
For sure.
So we've covered simple, unexpected, concrete, and credible. These are all great, but aren't we missing something? Don't people need to like feel something to really connect with an idea?
You are so right. And that is where the emotional principle comes in. We're not just rational beings.
Mm.
We are driven by our emotions and values.
That's so true. It's like you can have all the facts and figures in the world, but if it doesn't resonate with people on an emotional level, it's not going to stick. You know, it's a classic example of that. That Don't Mess with Texas anti-littering campaign. It wasn't just about keeping the state clean. It tapped into that Texan pride, this sense of ownership and responsibility for their state.
Oh, such a good example. It was brilliant.
Hey.
It wasn't just a message. It was an emotional appeal
Yeah.
that resonated with people's deeply held values.
Exactly. And they used those like tough-talking Texan celebrities too, which made it even more impactful. It felt authentic and real, you know?
Totally.
But sometimes, even when an idea has all these elements, it still doesn't quite land. Why is that?
Well, sometimes the missing piece is a good story.
Ah, stories.
Think about it. Stories engage us. They transport us to another place. They help us connect with ideas on a much deeper level.
Right, the Heaths talk about stories as the final principle
It's sixth principle.
for making ideas stick. It's like we're wired for stories, right? We've been telling them since the dawn of time.
Absolutely.
But how do you use them effectively? I mean, not every idea lends itself to a captivating tale.
That's true. But you'd be surprised how many do. Even seemingly dry topics can come alive through narrative. It's about finding the human element, the relatable experience. The book mentions this Xerox copier repairman. He learns this valuable lesson from a colleague's casual shop talk. Just a simple story. But it helps him solve this really tricky problem.
I see. It's like those aha moments where something suddenly clicks because we can see it playing out in our minds, like a little movie.
Exactly. Stories act as mental simulations, allowing us to experience the idea, not just hear about it. And then there are these springboard stories, the kind that help us envision change, like the one Stephen Denning used at the World Bank.
Oh, yeah. Remind me about that one.
He told the story of this health worker in Zambia who was struggling to find information. It highlighted the need for better knowledge management within the organization. It wasn't a complex report or anything, just a simple story, but it sparked a change in how the World Bank operated.
Wow. So a well-placed story can have a ripple effect. It can shift mindsets and drive action.
Absolutely.
That's powerful stuff.
It is. And going back to your earlier question
Right.
about manipulating versus connecting, stories are crucial for fostering that genuine connection. When we share our stories, we become vulnerable. We open ourselves up to others.
Right.
And that vulnerability creates space for empathy and understanding.
That's a great point. I think we often underestimate the power of vulnerability in communication. But let's be honest, not all stories are created equal. Some are captivating, others just fall flat. What makes the difference?
Well, structure matters, of course. But I think authenticity is key. People can sense when a story is forced or inauthentic. It's about finding the right story for the right moment, a story that truly resonates with your message and your audience.
So it's not just about slapping any old story onto an idea. It
Right.
needs to be the right fit, the right tone, the right emotional impact.
Exactly. And remember, the best stories often emerge organically from our own experiences. Think about those moments in your life that have taught you valuable lessons or shaped your perspective. Those are the stories that will resonate most deeply with others.
Oh, that's so true. It's like the stories that come from the heart are always the most powerful.
Exactly.
You know, this is making me think about my own communication style. I'm definitely a storyteller at heart, but I haven't always been strategic about it. I've often focused on being entertaining, rather than using stories to drive a specific point home.
Yeah, that's a common trap. We get so caught up in the story itself that we forget its purpose.
Yeah.
But when you use stories intentionally as a tool to illustrate a concept or evoke a particular emotion, they become incredibly powerful.
That's a really good point. I need to be more mindful of that. So we've got all 6 principles laid out now. Simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and stories. It's a pretty comprehensive framework, but is it foolproof? I mean, can any idea be made sticky using this approach?
It's a powerful framework, no doubt,
Yeah.
but it's not magic, and it's not always easy to implement. It takes practice and a willingness to experiment, and sometimes even with our best efforts, an idea just won't stick.
That's fair. I suppose context matters too, right? The same idea might resonate with one audience and fall flat with another.
Absolutely. Knowing your audience is crucial. What are their values? What are their concerns? What kind of stories are they likely to connect with?
It's like tailoring a suit. You need to get the measurements right.
Exactly.
So it's not just about the idea itself, it's about how you package and deliver it, taking all these factors into account.
Precisely. And that's where the art of communication comes in. It's not a formula. It's a process of understanding your audience, crafting your message, and delivering it in a way that truly connects.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful. I feel like I'm starting to see communication in a whole new light. Yeah. But I do have to ask, what happens when even a sticky idea meets resistance? When people just aren't buying it.
Well, sometimes even the best ideas are met with skepticism or even outright rejection. It could be due to deeply ingrained beliefs,
Yeah.
or conflicting values, or simply a lack of trust.
That makes sense. It's like no matter how well you present an idea, there's always going to be someone who disagrees.
Right.
Or who's just not ready to hear it.
Exactly.
The Heaths actually talk about a situation where a team tried to introduce storytelling into a presentation. For a group of executives, you would think executives would love stories.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah.
But these executives were really invested in this complex analytical framework they had developed. And they felt that using stories would oversimplify their hard work.
Interesting. So it backfired.
Essentially, yes. They felt like their expertise was being dismissed in favor of a few anecdotes.
I can see how that would happen. It's like you're trying to appeal to their emotional side, but they're stuck in a purely analytical mindset. How do you bridge that gap?
That's the million-dollar question. It often requires this delicate balance of logic and emotion, finding a way to speak to both their heads and their hearts.
So it's not just about knowing these principles, it's about knowing when and how to apply them effectively, like reading the room, so to speak.
Exactly. And that's where emotional intelligence and good old-fashioned listening skills really come into play.
It's like you're trying to speak two different languages.
Exactly.
And sometimes you need a translator, someone who can bridge that divide.
Right.
So going back to the SUCCES framework, it seems like a great starting point. But the real mastery comes in adapting it to different situations and audiences.
Absolutely. It's a toolbox, not a rule book.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier wanting to improve your presentations, and I think this framework has some really powerful implications there.
For sure. I've definitely sat through some presentations that were technically accurate, but totally boring. No stickiness whatsoever.
Right. It's like death by PowerPoint.
Exactly.
So think about how you could use the unexpected principle to shake things up a bit.
Okay.
Maybe start with a provocative question, or a surprising statistic, or even an anecdote. That challenges conventional wisdom.
Ooh, I like that. Instead of diving right into the data, you start by piquing their curiosity, getting them to lean in and wonder, where is this going?
Exactly. Grab their attention from the get-go.
And don't forget the power of concrete details. Instead of just talking about abstract concepts, bring them to life with real-world examples, vivid imagery, even props if appropriate.
Right. Help people see, feel, and experience the idea, not just intellectually grasp it.
In stories, those are gold, right?
Absolutely. A well-told story can create this emotional connection that no amount of data can replicate. Think about the last time you were truly moved by a presentation. Chances are there was a compelling story woven into it.
Yeah, that's true. Stories have this way of bypassing our defenses and going straight to the heart.
For sure.
This has been eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new arsenal of tools now to make my ideas more impactful. But where do you even begin? It feels like a lot to process.
Yeah. It can be overwhelming at first. But I think the best place to start is with awareness. Start by being mindful of the curse of knowledge. When you're crafting a presentation, or any communication, really, step outside your own expertise. Imagine you're explaining it to someone who knows nothing about the topic.
That's a great tip. It's so easy to get caught up in the jargon and technicalities that we forget how it sounds to someone who's not immersed in it every day.
Exactly. And then ask yourself, how can I make this simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and how can I tell a story? It doesn't have to be a perfect fit for every principle, but the more you can incorporate, the stickier your ideas will become.
It's like a checklist almost, to make sure you're hitting all the right notes.
Yeah, kind of.
You know what strikes me? This framework isn't just for presentations or formal communication. It can be applied to everyday conversations, even just trying to get your point across in a meeting.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of it. These principles are fundamentally about human psychology, how we process information, and what makes it memorable.
So it's not about tricks or manipulation. It's about tapping into how our brains are wired.
Exactly. And the more we understand those underlying principles, the more effective communicators we become in all areas of our lives.
That's a really empowering thought. So to wrap up this fascinating deep dive, what's the one thing you really want to leave our listener with?
That's a good question. I would say Remember that time you were super passionate about an idea, but you struggled to get someone to understand or care about it?
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
Think about how you could have used the SUCCES framework to make that idea more memorable and effective. Could you have simplified it, added an element of surprise, made it more concrete and relatable?
That's a powerful question to ponder. It's a great reminder that this is an ongoing process. We're always learning, experimenting, and refining our approach.
Exactly. And that's the exciting part. The journey of making ideas stick is never truly over. There's always room for improvement and new discoveries to be made.
Well said. Thank you so much for guiding me through this deep dive. It's been a truly enlightening conversation.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this exploration of sticky ideas. We hope you've gained some valuable insights. To make your own communication more impactful, remember, the power to make ideas stick is within your grasp. Go out there and make your ideas unforgettable.
It's like we're all trying to be better storytellers, right?
In a way, yeah. It's about finding those narratives that really connect with people.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, this has been amazing. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too.
Thanks for taking the time to break all this down.
Of course, it's been fun.
To our listeners, thanks for tuning in. And remember, keep those ideas sticky